Good morning and welcome to Lattes and Leaders with Dr. Brad Johnson, best-selling author and accomplished public speaker specializing in education and educational leadership. I am your co-host, Jeremy Johnson, organizational psychology consultant specializing in career coaching, training, and development. Meet us here each week to discuss topics in education and leadership and meet with some of the top education talent and thought partners from across the globe. So grab your latte, sit back, and enjoy a relaxed conversation that will leave you informed and encouraged. We have a very special guest with us. We have Dr. Stephanie Elizalde, who is the superintendent of the Dallas Independent School District. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing wonderful. How are you doing, Jeremy?
Oh, I'm doing great, doing great. Yeah, we're really excited to hear from you today.
Yeah,
I'm
good
excited to
morning.
be here. Good
Yeah,
morning.
thank you so much. Yeah, I'm excited to have you on. I follow you on social media and the work that you're doing. And I just think it's neat to have you on to kind of share a little bit of your journey and the great things that you're doing in the great state of Texas, which I love too. So, yeah, I'm just so glad to have you on today.
So let's get rolling. Can we hear a little bit about your journey so far?
Sure. So I'm actually born and raised in a border town called Laredo, Texas,
Hmm.
and lived there my whole childhood, with the exception of 1 year when my father moved us to Austin when he was working on a master's degree. So I actually was pre-med. My bachelor's degree is in biology with the wonderful hours of physics and chemistry that are necessary for your pre-med, for your medical school application. Long story short, I was not quite ready to start medical school. I felt like I needed I think what kids would call today a gap year
Yeah.
between college and professional school. And so I needed a break. So I decided to go try high school teaching. Well, a break and teaching, we both know, we all know, should never go together. Once I got into a classroom, the truth is, I really could not imagine myself doing anything other than being an educator. So that was all 37 years ago. I was 10 when I started, joking,
That's
of
right.
course, and then had to go back to school to get a master's and ultimately a doctorate in the educational field, since my undergrad was in a different area, and kind of progressed through there. Was with one school district in the San Antonio area for 16 years. Moved through teaching, administration, went to a larger urban district, San Antonio ISD, and ultimately in 2011, I found myself in the Dallas Independent School District as the director of mathematics.
Mhm.
So I'm really interested to hear about how your science and mathematics background has maybe informed some of your leadership.
I definitely could feel that type of training, teaching in that particular background did allow me to maybe have more of a, I'm going to use scientific method or mathematical algorithms in the way in which I viewed student performance or student achievement. So I was an early adopter of, well, what are the data telling us? And because
Mhm.
data don't, in and of itself, they don't give us answers, but they inform what questions we should be asking so that we
Mm.
can then put in additional practices or change our practices. And so I really found myself doing a lot more of what I'll call, kind of the cyclical. Let me analyze what I have observed in my students. Let me analyze their performance on tests. And then let me try to use that data to diagnose where I think the challenges are so that I could more connectedly find a solution that was actually attached to the problem. So really, even before, I think we in the last 20 years or so got into this root cause analysis, if you will, in education. I think that's something I was doing, not because I was smart, but because I had had that kind of training. Because in science and math, it's always an iterative process, but it's always cyclical. Assessing,
Mhm.
diagnosing, adjusting, and that process just continuing. So really,
Mhm.
really enjoyed being able to share that and feel very comfortable with that kind of approach to helping accelerate student outcomes.
I
Mhm.
love that, and I can kind of relate. You're out of my league with all the math and stuff. But my background was science, and that's actually what I taught as well. And I love the point you made about not just the data and not what it's telling you, but learning what questions to ask to get the result we need. Because that's how I've kind of approached it too, with like the scientific method, is like it's not about always knowing the right answer, it's about asking the right question. And that is just a big piece of the puzzle that I think sometimes we miss. And I think we also do that even in education with our students. We're so focused on the right answer that we forget to help them with that. We might, it's critical thinking, and to be able to say, hey, let's ask questions, let's question things, let's find the best question. I think Einstein even said that once. It's not about the right answer, it's about asking the right question. And I think that's a big part of leadership that sometimes gets lost in the mix because we're so quick to hunt a solution. And it may not even be for what we think it needs to be. So I love
Well,
that perspective.
and I think it was Einstein also who actually said we should spend more time actually identifying and working on what the true problem or challenge is you front load that, and
Mhm.
too oftentimes we're very quick to find solutions. Our team is very familiar with me saying, "Don't sell me the solution, sell me the problem," because we all have to be
I
on
love
board
that.
because they all want to come bring the solution, right?
Right.
And I'm like, well, I need to know what problem we're trying to solve in order for me to help guide whether I think the solution. So don't just bring me the solution, although I do want you to bring me a solution because don't just bring me problems either, right? But you mentioned something, Dr. Johnson, on the scientific method that I definitely use on a regular basis. I think all our teams use them and use it in Dallas ISD, and that is, well, what is our hypothesis, right? Like, what is the first view of data? What do we think that's telling us?
Right.
And so setting up that hypothesis and then digging into the data to say, do I have support for whether this hypothesis is true or not? A good example is in Dallas ISD, we definitely thought that having an extended school year, adding more time to the day would create increased student outcomes, increased student achievement. Well, after analyzing the data, and we were all convinced, right? It was almost part of that. I want to even find the data that supports where I want to go.
Right.
What is that called? Confirmation bias,
Confirmation bias,
Um,
exactly.
Absolutely. And guess what? The data didn't support it. So while we felt, with our hearts that that's what we wanted to do because we thought in our heart of hearts this is the right thing, when the data doesn't support it, we have to make sure we're actually connecting our heads with our heart. The heart is why we do the work, but our head is part of the guidance on making sure that we're able to fulfill what we think our mission is with our students.
Mm, I love
Mhm.
that. And that's,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, and I love that you even with your team is willing to do that. Like you said, it's almost like you're trying to find that confirmation. But if it's not there, it's like, yeah, it sounded like a good idea, but that's not what it shows. That's not what's supportive. So I think that's so important too. Sometimes I worry about that from the perspective when school districts are looking like extending time and things like that. The first thing I ask is, are they going deeper into subjects, or are they just adding more for the teacher and the student? And I'm afraid oftentimes that's probably what we see, and that might be why the data doesn't bring what we want either. So I think that's important perspective. So I'm glad you did that. I'm glad y'all looked at that and didn't just because it sounded good.
No, I think oftentimes I tell our team also the the new innovation is implementation.
Mm,
because we're too quick to move away from something without examining how did we roll it out? How did we execute it? It's again, it's that next layer of data analysis. And so we have to keep peeling away layers, and it does take time. But if we rush to putting in solutions, again, we may say that didn't work. And it's not that it didn't work, it's finding what part of that wasn't executed or implemented is sometimes important. And the reason I think that's important is when we change things too often, number one, our educators who are boots on the ground doing the work with our students, they're going to get tired. And I think right now, certainly as I follow a lot of your social media, Dr. Johnson, you talk about self care. And there's a difference between stressed out and burned out.
mhm,
And we have to ask ourselves sometimes, as the formal leaders in the organization, are we adding more, and are we creating our teachers and our educators to go from being stressed out to being burned out? We all know that in education, well, I would say even in today's society, we're going to be stressed.
mhm.
but
Hmm.
but again, we have to make sure we're keeping folks from getting burned out. And I think we have a responsibility. So when we change things too much, our folks are like, well, do we know what we're doing? Where are we going? It increases their level of anxiety,
Right,
which really doesn't allow them to be their very best self.
right.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, and that's so true when you think about it. And, we can go back to COVID and rehash that, but the anxiety levels just, it keeps you from being your best. It keeps you from, uh, everything from the brain function to everything else. And so, yeah, adding that level of anxiety for the sake of change's sake, yeah, it probably inhibits it more than anything.
Looking over some of your accolades, I see that you have been recognized by different organizations for your impact on the community. So, can you speak
Mm,
on the importance of building that not only internal school community but branching out into the outer local communities?
So first, I definitely want to make sure that any accolade that may be attributed with my name is never an accolade that I
mm,
accomplished at all.
Mm.
It's always been the work of folks, and we have this uncanny ability in our society to want to categorize and label and name so many things that I think that gets lost sometimes. So, truthfully, any success, any accolade has been a team effort, and I could go on and on about all the people that contribute to that, from my parents, my sister, my son, my husband, all the way to the teachers that taught me, to the teachers that serve our community today. I think part of the community work, certainly in the districts that I've served, and I'm sure it's everywhere, um, but people really do want to know how much we care. It's that adage of they will never forget how we make them feel.
right,
And we have to ensure that we're not just kind of 8 to 3 educators. And so when there are opportunities to expand into the community, to be a part of the community, it does, it messages more than words that I really do care about those 3 letters I think are very important. We can use that OUR, but are we showing that this is our community? And so partnering with community and various partners is a part of the work. And it's also the part where you continue to build the relationships. And without the relationships, it doesn't matter how great a plan or how much data analysis, or we really have to connect with people for a variety of reasons. But I think there are two that are really important. One is we don't know it all. While we're experts in educational areas, we don't have the answers, because education is such a complex system. It's a complex activity. It's a complex strategy. It's a complex lifetime. I mean, it's something that we do in classrooms, outside of classrooms. It's an ongoing, really, it's an evolution because it's part of our life. Well, that component also comes from external factors outside of the school. And so we can learn a lot from our community when we listen and engage with them. And so, in order for that to happen, to use some Stephen Covey work, right? The speed of trust. And you can't build
Very much so.
trust if you don't spend time, which is why
Mhm.
time is the most important commodity that anyone can give us, and it's the most important commodity that we can give to anyone is our time, and particularly because that value of time can never be given back. So when I choose to spend my time in our community, or they choose to spend their time with us, we never get that time back. So that's truly,
Right.
you want to make sure it's a good investment. So I think just community has been it's really been a core component of being able to communicate what rationale we have for decisions we're making, and as well as a venue for gathering information.
Mhm.
You're in one of the largest school districts and in a very large city. Do you find it harder to connect? I mean, because you've got all the businesses, you've got all the people, you've got, people. I mean, you have such a diverse population there. Do you find that hard or easier because of that?
I don't know that I've ever tried to label it as either. I think,
Mm.
it's an interesting question because I don't think I've thought of it as either easy or hard. I've thought of it as enjoyable.
Mm,
Um,
Mhm.
and so,
Oh.
I think I would say that I would I struggle that I never think I got to everywhere that I wanted to be,
mm,
but I don't know that I consider that hard. I don't know if that's even making sense, but it's, because when you enjoy it, right? When it's something that you're
Mhm.
like, I'm called to interact with folks and I really enjoy, even in the opportunities where sometimes the communication isn't always pleasant, it's still enjoyable because I get to learn. And so hard or easy or difficult, don't those words don't connect with that particular activity more than I wish I could get to more places. And we have a whole team, and the whole team has that same. So if it is like
right.
I'm trying to get to everywhere, well, no, I'm not going to be able to do that. But I think that's also part of that whole definition of leadership. So leadership or the superintendent is not. I don't consider. I really don't think of myself as the superintendent. I think of it as I get to serve in the superintendency, and it's a team. That's a group of people, a collection,
Mhm.
and so it's the team that also goes and communicates and is part of the community. They live in our community. They have their children in our community, their grandchildren, their nieces, their
Right.
nephews.
Right.
And so I think that whole process is, it's just, I'm really reflecting on that, Dr. Johnson, because I've never even thought about it that way.
Well, that might not have been, yeah, the best way to prompt it, but I do think I think for some superintendents, it may be more of a struggle and it may be more of a personality thing than anything else. But you hit on it earlier, and I do. My thought is when you think of the children, students from about the age of 4 to 18, they spend a large part of their waking hours in the school. And so I really do think, building that community and building that connection with the parents and with the community at large is just such an important piece of it. Because when we don't, and we see this now across the country, a lot of times we see division, especially with the political, everything like it is. I think the school districts that really focus on building those connections with the community do better, during these times because they are open, and like you said, you're sharing, you let them know what's going on, you listen to them and get input from them, and to me, that really creates that healthy culture that we need.
Well, it's been very important because um, it there are so many challenges for our scholars in our classrooms and outside of our classrooms, and so our children, our students are having to listen to social media, listen to their parents, listen to their peers, and they're exposed to so much.
So
How do
much.
we help them? Yeah, and so how do we help them? And part of that is um, allowing them to also have voice, and that's an area that I think, as a school district, I think it's an area that we need to focus in more. We've done a lot of community work, and now we're really starting to ask ourselves, where's the specific student voice in our
Mm.
processes? As a matter of fact, our board of trustees is undertaking a new goal setting process because our last set of goals expire this year. They're usually set them in 5 year increments, and so it's time for new goals. And some of our board members asked, is this one of those processes that maybe now we could even include student voice as we
Mm.
develop these new goals, which I think is just reflective of the leadership that my board has and what their expectations are of me and our team, to include student voice as we continue moving our district forward.
I think that's so true. Because I know in education we don't like to compare to business or whatever, but in a way it is, and the students are the client, the customer, and most good businesses, smart businesses, listen to the feedback of their clients, and you know they may be children, but they like you said, they're exposed to so much now. A couple of years ago I read this thing that said that a 5-year old entering kindergarten has already been exposed to more information technology, et cetera, than their grandparents were leaving high school. So you're dealing with a
Wow.
totally different client now than we were in the past. So I agree with you so much that there has to be, a way to get input from them and, make that part of the process. To make it relevant, to have that buy-in, that ownership that we always talk about, we have to make that stride to get there. I think that's so important, and I think that's awesome that you're leading the way with that in such a large district.
Now, can you tell us about some of the initiatives that you've been a part of that have involved the local community?
Sure. Um, so I'll start with one that our board of trustees really studied and recognized the importance of students being involved in more than just the 8 to 3, 8 to 4 school day, reading the research about involvement in extracurricular activities, co-curricular activities, and really wanting to ensure that our students all had opportunities to participate in things that they might not normally be able to do, based on some of the backgrounds of some of the students that we get to serve. And so, expanding and working with our community, and that community is very broad, from the parents to actual partners. What we've been able to do, and we haven't reached the pinnacle where it's still a work in progress, but we have increased the percentage of students, the numbers of students that now get to participate in after school activities, and everything from karate to yoga to piano, music, theater, drama, debate,
Mm,
and
love it.
started early on at the elementary level. So some of our teachers started chess clubs or Spanish clubs, or even for the younger kiddos, puzzles. We had puzzle club,
Mm,
and then using all of that, of course, to help if students wanted to be a part of athletics or band or our national junior ROTCs, or so there's just been a variety of recognizing that the students' interest, we have to develop that much earlier rather than, well, let's just wait till to get to high school and then, or middle school or junior high. And so really starting early with that. And in addition to that, also recognizing that there's a whole myriad of professions, careers that we should not be waiting for our kids to be exposed to that either. So at the elementary level, we have career explorations. At junior high, middle schools, we have a it's a like an 18 wheeler that has activities inside it. So
Hmm.
it's mobile and it goes to schools, and inside it has demos for many of the career pathways that we have in our schools, and that all of those, from the extracurricular to the career explorations, college and career, we've started that much earlier with all of our community, involving our parents to giving us feedback, our institutions of higher learning that are in our community, our businesses in our community. American Airlines partners with us, Southwest Airlines partners with us. We've got then, and that has then led to internships and mentorships. And so I've got, one particular story that just comes to mind as you asked me this question, Jeremy, was all of that led to, got this young lady who just graduated 2 years ago from one of our high schools, and with the high school that American Airlines partners with. And there was a, they gave the interns, she was interning, and they gave all of the interns this um, computer programming glitch to solve. Now, the interns didn't know that this was a real problem that American Airlines had in one of their programming systems. Well, it was our student that was actually able to solve this particular challenge. I don't know enough about this particular technology, so I will not be able to speak to that. She's way smarter than me for sure, and that turned into a full-time job for this young lady, and she's been in that role for 2 years, and they are now paying for her to finish her bachelor's degree because she graduated high school with an associate's degree and with a certification in this particular technology area. And the reason it's such a great story is, so her whole family's income collectively was about $30,000. That's her family income when, as she was a student, if you will. The first job American Airlines offered her was $58,000.
Wow.
So
Wow.
that is life
Life
changing
changing.
for,
Absolutely.
yes, for for folks in our community.
I love that.
Absolutely.
I love that. In fact, as you were sharing that, it spurred someone we had talked to earlier a few weeks ago. They're taking and kind of copying in Switzerland, they have apprenticeships, which sounds kind of like what she was doing. And what they do is take high school students and let them go work in the fields that they're interested in. And so they're getting high school credit and getting work experience and getting paid at the same time. And I'm like, and the point they were saying is, think about it. They're engaged in their work because they're in the field that they want to be in. And you never have to worry about absenteeism. You know, a lot of the things that we worry about take care of themselves, and they're getting paid. And I'm like, there is so many things just like that that you're doing that's so neat and kind of cutting edge that really I think we kind of need to move towards. Because like you said, just something as simple as that was life changing for her family before she was even done with college. And that's powerful and impactful to the community. I love that you do that with the extracurricular. I think that's so important. One of the things that I talk about with private school, and I know we don't like to compare, but one of the things in private school is they, and it's because they're typically smaller, but most of their students do extracurricular or co-curricular activities. And so it builds that sense of community. And so I think that's something important for our public schools as well, because when the students can go do karate or what, it doesn't have to be sports, whatever it is, but it does build that sense of community to the school, to their peers, and helps them find things they're interested in, talents or passions that they may not have even been aware of. So I think that's so powerful and such an important part of education, that is truly educating the child. helping them find their strengths, their talents, and develop those. So that I love that you're doing that, and I think that's something that we probably need to replicate more and more around the country.
Well, you said something, Dr. Johnson, about their talents, and you're so right. We don't know what genius kids we have. We know they're geniuses. We don't always know in what area, because
Right.
if they don't have opportunity to experience these things, how do they know where
Right.
their genius and talent lies, right? So part of what we have to do is uncover their talents. It's there. It's for us to do that, and in many instances, I really don't like even the use of, when we say some of our student groups or our districts that serve large percentages of economically disadvantaged families, that we have achievement gaps. Well, I don't think they're achievement gaps. I think they're opportunity gaps,
Right.
because the more opportunities we provide for our students, and I do we do compare. I would say in Dallas ISD we do look at, well, what are our private schools doing, and how can we, we want to learn from how to improve from all different areas. It shouldn't be an either or, it should be a both and I'm very fortunate that the private schools in our area are so willing to share with us. Many of them actually send students that are from high school to mentor some of our elementary students. We have great
Wow.
rapport with our private schools. They also offer some scholarships to some of our students that may be qualified to go to that school but may not be able to afford, their family may not be able to afford that tuition. So we do continue to partner in many ways with them, and it is, I think, one of the challenges. You mentioned size could be a challenge for some of us. The other one is the financial impact.
Hmm.
So many of our private schools, the parents can pay for both. you know I'm one of those parents. I mean, my kiddo's now grown, but we paid for, oh, okay, he's going to play football. He needs to improve, and he wants to be a running back. He needs to improve his running technique. And so we were fortunate at the time that we could pay for him to have coaching in that area. That costs money, right?
Right.
And it costs time. I have to be able to get him there. I have to be able, those are all things that are difficult for families that have bigger economic challenges. And so we have to help. We can't let that be a barrier,
Right.
because it really shouldn't matter what zip code our kiddos are in. So the district, again, because of the courage and the leadership of our board, invested in putting dollars into equipment,
Mm.
into fees, into our coaches, paying our
Right. Right.
coaches and our sponsors, so that they'll stay and not leave us, and so on. So and it is that gap of what the academics are. When you can connect them, I like the you use the word relevancy, when it makes things more relevant. So things that I'm doing in a classroom actually do connect to things out on the field or on the court or in a dance studio. And when we can make those connections, all of the learning also becomes so much more real. And sometimes I tell folks, some of our kids are coming just for band, or they're coming just for
Right.
athletics or
Absolutely.
cheer, and algebra and English too are an accident, right? Like, first I'm coming for sports, but I know I have to do well in academics. So, and you know what? We're good with that. If that's what's driving them there, because
Right.
it's about ensuring that they get it complete so that they can then move into their next phase of their college and career life.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Such a good
Um,
point. Yeah. Absolutely.
So you've already touched on this a bit, but can you tell us what qualities you see as making the biggest impact on being an effective leader in education?
Yeah, I think I think the first one is you do have to be confident. And I think the confidence has to come though from, and when I use that word, it has to be authentic confidence. So
Mm.
Mhm.
you have to read, you have to study, you have to listen. So within the whole word of confidence or being confident, I like to use that particular word in also recognizing I'm asking parents to choose Dallas ISD to bring me their most prized possession,
Mm.
their children. And no one is going to want to bring their child to a place where we think we're just okay, right? Like you think about the doctors you choose, and if someone says, "Well, what do
Right.
you think about this doctor?" and I say,
Mhm.
he's okay, are you going to go like, "Yeah, I'm going to that doctor," right? So that has to come from, I don't want us to just be okay. So I tell our team, we have to know what we're doing. We have to stay up to date with what we're doing, and that's our responsibility. And some of that learning comes from listening, because sometimes it does mean community engagement. So confidence, but there's a fine line between confidence and arrogance. And we have to make
Mhm.
sure that we know where that line is. So I often remind, and I start with myself. I think one of the most important things a leader can do is be vulnerable and use ourselves as emphasizing that we've all not been our best at one point or another. And it's, what did we learn from that? It is about progress, not perfection. But you can't do that if you're not willing to hold the mirror up first and be reflective enough. So I always tell our group, sometimes you might move into arrogance and you don't even know you have. And that's why you have to surround yourself, right, with people who are going to go, whoa, 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 wait a minute. Is that really the way you wanted to
Mhm.
say that? Is that really what you meant? So you have to create a psychologically safe environment. We need a physically safe environment, but we also need psychologically safe
Mhm.
environments where our team members can take risks and be authentic. The second part, beyond, be confident but not cocky, the second one would be, we've got to be compassionate. And sometimes we confuse compassion with weakness. And I don't. I think compassion is actually a strength, that you can say, I might have to make a really difficult decision. I can still make that decision with compassion.
Mhm.
And that, in fact, it makes the way in which it's received so much better for everyone involved. Conflict is inevitable in what we do, but combat is optional.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
so we should really choose that we may not agree, but we don't have to get into a fight over it, if you will. And so I think compassion, it's such a key component, because all of the work that we do in education is done with, through, and for people. So we're a total 100% people um, industry, if you will. So compassion, and being and recognizing that compassion doesn't mean that you're weak. And then I think the um, final characteristic, I think, would be you have to be courageous.
Mm.
So sometimes we're going to have to step out there, and maybe it's not going to be a popular decision. Maybe I did listen to the community, but I don't agree with the perspective, given some additional information or given some training that we may have. And so sometimes we have to make some courageous decisions for the greater good. That also happens. So we have to be bold, but we don't have to be bullies. And but if it was easy, then anybody would be doing what we do. And so I do think that it's important to just kind of, and all of those, what I consider those three C's, the underpinning for all of those is we have to be reflective leaders. The first thing we have to do is always look at our own behaviors, our own actions, our own statements. It's real easy to point out other people's flaws. We're not so good at pointing out our own. And I think that's really the key component, to being respected, because leadership, you can have a lot of titles. It doesn't mean you're going to be a leader. Leadership truly is earned, and it's in what we say and it's in what we do. And that's where I think leadership comes from.
Oh, I love that. You really just hit on the major points, especially that I believe in. In fact, it's funny. We just finished writing a book because Jeremy's background is in psychology, but it's called Finding Your Leadership Edge, and it's actually balancing assertiveness and compassion. And you just eloquently just described that, and it's so important. You know, you got to be assertive enough to make tough decisions when you have to, But like you said, it's a people driven industry. You know, we talk about education is what's called a high agreeableness when we look at personality traits, and high agreeableness is it. And most teachers tend to be high in agreeableness. They're kind, they're empathetic, they're caring. And so that's why it's so important to lead with that compassionate side too, because you know teachers need affirmation and support and encouragement. And so if you leave that piece out, you're missing a big piece of, you know, helping them realize their potential and being their best. So you articulated that so well. I just wanted to share that with
Mhm.
you. That was really good and hit right on the point. You know, when you're compassionate and care about them as people first, you get that. We call it building trust capital, so that you can make those tough decisions if you have to, and they will be okay with that because you were compassionate and listen to them and have that relationship with them. So, well said. Thank you.
Yeah, it reminds me when I tell our team, if we have to make a withdrawal, so to speak, well, we need to have made deposits, right? You can't go
Absolutely
try to make withdrawals, and I think that's, you made me think of that when you said, trust capital. I like that description as well. You have to first ensure that you're pouring in before you go make those
right.
withdrawals. And too oftentimes we're quick to, like, want to call on someone to help us with a certain decision, but if we haven't really made any
Right.
deposits, it's going to be very difficult for people because you don't have that. I wrote that one down, trust capital. And so clearly, there's a lot of alignment in the things that you all write about and so on with the work that we're doing in Dallas ISD.
I love that.
Can you tell us about a teacher or two that had the greatest impact on your development?
Yeah, it's hard because there are so many. I think that's
Mhm.
which says I got a great education, and I did. And actually, I think that's also part of the reason that I chose, that I think that calling when I got into that high school classroom was, I saw what I believed were kids not getting the best public education at the time in that moment in that classroom. And I wanted that to change. I wanted them to
Mm,
have the kind of outstanding public education experience that I had had. So I would be remiss if I didn't start by saying, really, the first teachers that impacted my life were my parents.
mm,
And I think that's
love
true
that.
for all of our students. I think their first teachers are their family members at home. Some of my kiddos are raised by grandparents or by aunts and uncles, in a few cases maybe even by an older sibling. So I think our first teachers, certainly for me, it was my parents. And I usually even say I was raised by Lucy and Ricky Ricardo. So my mother, if you can kind of picture that for people who remember the show. So my mother, her maiden name, her full name is Edith Jean Keller,
Mm,
and non-Latina. And my father is Jose Roberto Elizalde, very Latino. So you can imagine the background in my home of a very strong-willed German ancestry of my mother with a very strong-willed Latino male. And so my mom was a secretary. She worked civil service her entire career. And my father was a teacher, became a principal, and then actually went to Mexico, in Monterrey, and obtained an MD in Mexico, but never practiced in the United States, came back into the educational field, and ultimately retired as a principal. And so, but his background was originally engineering. So my math science love came from the
mm,
fact that the two teachers in my home, if you will, my dad was always teaching me the math side, before it was taught in school. So it allowed me to go to school and be seen as this very bright little girl who knew math. And it wasn't that at all. I'm as average IQ as they come. But it helped me later on understand the halo effect. And so
Mm,
teachers treated me as if I was smart because I had a few skills that maybe the rest of my classmates hadn't quite gotten yet. And but when we treat our kids as they treated me as smart, I behaved as I was smart because I thought I was smart. And
mm,
it really affected me in terms of how I also then became a teacher, recognizing that my expectations and how I treated kids was powerful into their success. And then my mom was is an avid reader. So I got a lot of English lessons, if you will, the reading and writing component at home from my mom. And so those two teachers, if you will, played such an important role. But then I remember being in second grade, Mrs. Salazar. And that was my first year actually in public school. So had been in a small little private school. And the only reason I was in a private school was because my birthday was September the 8th. And in
mm.
Texas, you have to be, you have to turn that age for that grade level on or
Before.
before
Yeah,
September 1st.
right.
So my mother's like, there's no way you're staying home a whole other year. So the place they would take me, um, absolutely. So the place that they could get me in was a private school. So pre-kinder, kinder, and first grade. I was at Mrs. McBride's private school in Laredo, Texas. And then
Mm,
second grade, I went to C.L. Milton Elementary School. And so Mrs. Salazar was a very organized, very proper, you know, when you think about the a traditional teacher, that's what Mrs. Salazar represented. And all of my teachers prior to Miss Salazar were all white, non Hispanic ladies. And so this was my first Latina teacher in a formal setting.
mm,
And she had such an impact in the way she carried herself and the way in which she connected with her students. And so I remember her just making me feel so special and how she made all of us feel that way, right? And then I can remember Mrs. Boteo in third grade, and I could Ms. Gutierrez in fourth grade, and Mr. Castro in fifth grade. I could go on and on. Miss Espinosa, my sixth grade teacher, who was also my cheer sponsor. And
mm,
then I remember high school. And in high school, in particular, was my calculus teacher, Armandina de los Santos. And seeing a woman do all this
mm,
mathematics just gave me this like I can do all of this work. She's showing me that it can be done. And so that's also when I was like, we don't have enough women in the STEM fields. And I think that also got me more interested into, you know, either engineering or medicine. And that's how I ended up starting out that route when I went to
mm,
college. So these teachers, when I think about the commonalities, um, they all believed in me. They all
mm,
corrected me. They all got on to me, but they always did it in a way that made me feel like it was for me, not to me.
right.
And I think that's the key difference. I think it's Lou Holtz who once said, discipline is something we do for kids, not to them.
Mm,
I'm pretty sure he was talking about his football players at Notre Dame, but I go ahead and use it
right.
in a different form. So those are kind of the teachers that come to the forefront for me.
Mhm.
That's so awesome, and yeah, I think we do. We all have those we remember that impacted. But what I thought was interesting, what you just said about expecting the best of you, pushing you, and things like that. Because sometimes, like when I talk about relationship, people think I'm just talking about warm, fuzzy, be their friend. But real relationship is hard conversation sometimes. It is about pushing to be your best or calling you out when you're not, doing your best and they know that you can. To me, that's when I talk about relationship, that's what I mean. And that sounds like the teachers that you had that because you care enough to want that for them and to get that from them, and that's powerful. And you even all these years later, remember that, and it impacted you, and helped form, like you said, your path, which is, you probably don't think of it yet, or maybe you have, but all the lives now that you've impacted because of how they impacted you. that'll go forward and do things and be great things, and whether it's in education or in another field, because you were that way with them.
Dr. Johnson, you just said something that made me think of one more teacher that I absolutely have to mention. Because sometimes we think of our teachers, and for some reason we, forget that there's a whole bunch of teachers that impacted us
Mm,
after we left our public school student training. And when you said have that relationship to call you out or to because they care about you, immediately I thought of Miss Catherine Warren, who was my mentor teacher my first year that I was a
okay.
teacher at Southwest High School in San Antonio, Texas. And I would not be here. I mean, there was lots of things that have contributed to me being able to become the superintendent and to serve in Dallas ISD. But I definitely 100% would not be having this opportunity had I not had Catherine Warren as my mentor teacher. She was the most amazing teacher, and she would come during her planning period. She would come observe me, and then she would give me feedback. This is way back. I mean, this is 1987. This is way before um, Knight's coaching models,
Right,
and this
right,
is
right.
way before teaching feedback cycles. It's before any of the leverage leadership, or it's way before any of that. And she knew what good teaching was for students, and she knew what good teaching was for teachers. And then
Mm,
she'd have me come observe her classroom, and then she'd have me give her feedback. I'm like, how am I going to give you feedback? I mean, I'm a first year teacher. And she said, but that's how you learn, is also by giving feedback. So she set
Mhm.
that vulnerability and that psychological safety from the beginning. And she held me to very high standards. And I think that's part of that relationship. And she didn't just set the standard, she also allowed me a ladder to reach the standard. So when I wasn't at the standard, she didn't change it. She placed the ladder on the wall for me, if you will. I like to use metaphors and analogies. And so it's not about changing the expectation. It taught me not to change expectations for my students, that I wasn't a good teacher because I had a high failure rate. In fact, that said I wasn't a good teacher. But that didn't mean to change the expectation for the students. She told me one time, I said, "What do you want me to change my expectations?" And she said, "Yes, I do." And I said, "So I should lower expectations for my students?" And she said, "No, you need to increase the expectations of yourself." And that was the
I
first
love
moment I
that.
was like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh. She said, "Your student performance is a reflection of you, it's of your work." And that's when I was like, oh my God. And that's when I really started to understand scaffolding and
Mm,
differentiation,
yeah.
and that it is about what are the gaps that my students have and how do I fill that gap. And guess what? When I help fill that gap, and which is, represented in my analogy by placing the ladder on the wall, every student can then, if as long as the rungs are present, every student can reach the
Mm,
expectation, and everyone isn't on the same rung. Some of our
right,
kids are much
right.
closer on the highest rung, some of our kids are not, but it's my job as the teacher to make sure that they can move rung to rung and to ultimately get to that expectation.
I love that.
Mhm.
That's a good
Wow.
analogy. Absolutely. Yeah, so we're almost done. Thank you so much. I got one tough one and then I'll ask you something else. But the tough one here is, this is Lattes and Leaders. And and I named it that because, and I might have shared with you earlier. I get forgetful in my old age, but it was, meeting with people informally and just having those informal conversations at a coffee shop or whatever. But anyway, so for the latte part, what is your? We know in education, teachers usually, we joke about living our that coffee is our fuel. But what is your hot beverage of choice? Is it coffee, latte, tea, something else?
It's a caramel macchiato
Ooh,
Oh, wow.
with extra foam.
all
There's
right,
something about that foam that doesn't
Mhm.
add the extra calories like
right,
whipped cream
right.
does. But yeah, once I had a caramel macchiato in, I don't know how long ago, maybe 10 years ago, that just, it kind of stuck.
Yeah.
That was it, huh?
Yeah.
That was it. Once I had a caramel macchiato, that was it. It became the favorite beverage, and it's like no matter what, I have to get up early enough to make sure I can get my caramel macchiatos, make it through the day.
To make it through the day. That's right. Is there, have you got like a parting thought or anything you'd like to share, like with maybe new leaders, people moving into leadership roles, or maybe that are struggling in their leadership role?
I think the most important thing is reach out. I think early on in my career, sometimes I might have been afraid to have made a phone call or sent an
Mm,
email, or and when we do, we find out we're not alone in whatever we're struggling with. So whether you're a new leader or an experienced leader, because sometimes it happens to us and we get experienced and we're in a struggle and we're like, oh, I'm experienced, I'm not supposed to need help. No. Again, I think it's one of those that we do so much better when we work collaboratively. This is a collaborative kind of work that we do in education, and I think most of us want to be helpful when we can. I know when someone reaches out, a new superintendent, or a new administrator, I don't have all the answers, but I always want to share things that maybe can help. From most of the time, it's from things that I didn't do so well. Why have
right.
everybody have to go through that experience, right? Like, learn from some of the experiences that we've had so that they can accelerate and eclipse whatever accomplishments some of us have been able to do collectively with others.
I love that. Yeah. Was it Mark Twain or somebody said, a smart person learns from their mistakes, but a wise person learns from the mistakes of others. And you're exactly right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. Like I said, I know you're busy and it's a busy time of the year, but I just follow you on social media and just kind of knew a little bit about your story, and just, to get to the level you have, it takes a lot of work, a lot of persistence, and, you know, to get there, you have to do some leadership things right. And so I was looking forward to you sharing those today, and you certainly didn't disappoint. So thank you for taking the time to be with us and share those.
Well, thank you. These kinds of sessions are always, as I mentioned to you before we got started. It's cathartic. I mean, it's one of those where you end up reflecting yourself, and then things you all ask questions that make me think and go, "Ooh, this is something else I need to work on," or "Have we thought about this?" So I really appreciate you all pouring into me today as well.
This has been Lattes and Leaders with Dr. Brad Johnson. We hope that you leave today feeling informed and inspired. For more educational content, be sure to add this podcast to your list and follow Dr. Johnson on any and all social media platforms. For more information on Dr. Johnson, Jeremy Johnson, and special guest, check out drbradjohnson.com. That is DOCTOR, bradjohnson.com. Hope to have you back soon.